Welcome back, everyone, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, joined by my co-host, Katie Harris. We're going to continue our conversation with the great Ashton Holbrook. We're going to maybe start throwing that into his title here.
That is how we refer to you around
the
our
great
office,
Ashton
Holbrook.
Please don't. I've been called a lot of things. Great is not.
Well,
comfortable?
We
Not
appreciate you.
comfortable. Thank you. Yes.
We appreciate you sticking around because we were talking about so many cool things in part one. We wanted to continue into part two, so this is going to be the second half of our interview with you. We were talking as we were off record, before we turned on the recording, about a few things we feel like it would be good to cover.
Yeah.
I think some things that are very, very applicable to our industries, or the industries we serve, rather, because there's just a lot that happens in the restoration world that we feel like mental health-wise is maybe not being addressed as well as it should be, or maybe just not talked about. Again, I don't feel like there's people out there that are like actively
Don't talk about it.
Yeah, it's just like there's an awareness piece that I think needs to be done a little bit better.
Sure.
So I think we want to dive into a couple different things. First off, something that a lot of restoration business owners deal with, specifically restoration, this is not necessarily as applicable to the rest of the home service industry, is a lot of restoration companies do some kind of like trauma cleanup. They work with maybe local police departments or fire departments and are oftentimes dealing with pretty scary situations and pretty sad situations in a lot of cases.
Of those things.
The aftermath of those things. Katie, you actually had an experience recently with your son working for a restoration company. You want to maybe share that story a little bit?
Well, I love the idea, number one, of my kids working in the restoration space because you want to learn grit and you want to learn how to work hard and work with people and be empathetic. Like there's so many great skills that come from being a restorer, working in the restoration space. And he just had a short period of time before he went to school and had the opportunity to go be a painter, right? Like it's your dream. You got to go be a painter for a few months. But one day, it's all hands on deck and it's like, hey, we got to have all you guys out to a job, head out here, and walks into a suicide cleanup, right? 21 years old, not experienced, not prepared. And it's made me think a lot about the impact in the industry. We have clients, we have good friends. They're doing this on the daily basis. As we talked in episode 1, in that first episode, we talked about how 70% of people have impacts of trauma that are affecting them. Yep. And this brings this so home to me. I'm like, my son came home, he was really upset, like had a lot of questions, was gritty, was like, I did it and it was fine. And I'm going back to work tomorrow, right? Like nothing, yet it lingered, right? Yeah. The thoughts of it lingered, the feelings of it lingered, all of that trauma aspect. And so I think specific to this industry, how would you recommend, or what are your thoughts around that topic when you're working in a space that day in and day out, if you're not walking into a crime scene, right? You are walking into somebody else's worst day and being a part of it.
Yes,
big time.
Absolutely. You're walking into somebody else's worst day. And I like the way that you put that. I think that's very, very relevant. I think one of the things that comes to my mind right away is we need to give space for the employees to process what has happened. In critical incident stress management, which is a tool that's used for first responders to help them process the events of the traumatic event that they witnessed on job. So we're talking for paramedics, firefighters, police, people who have been through natural disasters, any of that kind of stuff. It follows a pattern of giving people the space to talk, reviewing the details of what happened, how they felt about what happened, and then connecting them with resources for further processing should they need that. Right? I think that folks in this industry could probably use the same pattern, right? I don't know how busy things are. I don't know if there's a lot of time for that, but there needs to at least be space for that. I mean, even at the hospital when we would have critical incidences, we would always have these post-vention.
Like a debrief?
Like a debrief, yeah. And I think just that could be a helpful way in making sure that your employees are okay. Get the work finished up, get cleaned up. Maybe the next day you come back, you take 15 minutes and just say, okay, how are you doing with what happened yesterday? What's going on?
Yeah, that's great.
Here is some information in case you need to talk to somebody, right? So at least you're initiating that process for them getting help if they want to do that.
You're acknowledging
that
you just walked into
yes.
a hard situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say too is, and I want to be careful how I word this because I don't want to sound insensitive, but people walking into situations like that, we all use humor to cope, right? Mm-hmm. And some people's humor is really dark, right? Macabre. I've developed a very dark sense of humor over the years as well. But that's how we cope with stressful, horrible things at times. And so if you're there and you're actually engaged in some of that cleaning up and you crack a joke, that's okay, I would say.
Yeah.
Right?
It might come across as
crass or insensitive or uncaring,
yeah.
but you're in the moment and you're trying to cope and you're trying to deal with that high stress of a situation you've never been in before that you don't want to be in. I couldn't even imagine that. So you got to do something, right? And humor is how people cope. And I see these news stories about people getting in trouble because of jokes they cracked. But then I look at the situation that they were in and I'm like,
they were coping.
Maybe give that guy some slack, Yeah, it's not appropriate. It's not, something you would bring up in a normal conversation, but the dude was trying to deal with what he was being dealt at the moment.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That's great.
Yeah. And so I guess more than anything with that, I would just say, like, don't feel guilty about it, right? Because a lot of times people will feel that guilt about cracking the joke or something like that, or just laughing because of what they're seeing. That's okay. That's a normal response.
Or in the case where we were talking about in the first part, where we want to empathize with people. If you're a manager or you're maybe it's a team, a teammate of some kind that has maybe cracked a joke, and you're a manager of that person, don't punish someone.
Hey, don't harp on them right
don't
away.
Harp on them.
At least not right there in that moment. Maybe you save it for a correction later.
In the debrief, we can talk about it later or whatever, but trying to empathize with someone, think in your brain, like this person is trying to cope with what they just saw or experienced.
And this isn't to say that if you show up at a scene like this that you should be laughing and that you should be callous or light. This is just saying that people cope differently with how they see these horrific things. One thing too that just came to mind as well for business owners is partner with your local therapists.
Oh, good idea.
Start talking with therapists that in the area. Start asking around and look for resources of like, hey, I run a restoration business. We deal with this. Can I have you like on the spot to talk to somebody if we need to? Can we work out a contract for that? Can we do something with that'll allow me to provide this service to my employees? If you have a situation where you're able to provide insurance for your employees, look at adding an EAP to your
and can you explain what an EAP is?
Employee Assistance Program. So EAPs, some of the bigger companies out there are BPA, at least here in Idaho, are BPA, ComPsych. Those are the two biggest ones that I know of. And what an EAP does, what an Employee Assistance Program does, is it provides, the company contracts with local therapists in your area to provide immediate mental health services if they're needed. And so, like, for example, with like a ComPsych contract, I might, if I get a referral and I accept that referral, I have I think it's 5 days to get them in, right? So I have to get them in right away. And so it's meant to be kind of an immediate response to a mental health need that they might have. Usually they provide anywhere between 3 to 10 services per incident.
Okay.
Gotcha.
To help that employee just kind of deal with what's going on.
Very cool.
The whole concept behind it is awesome. I mean, there's a lot of, and we could talk more about this at the end, but there's a lot of insurances out there that are provided through maybe your work that people aren't even aware of offer some mental health benefits.
Most of your big insurance companies have an EAP. It's just a matter, I believe, of getting that linked to your insurance.
To your local therapist or whatever. Yeah. Like we, again, it's because of the awareness thing. Last year when we did this series, our office learned that, hey, like our insurance here at Spot On Solutions covers some mental health benefits. And it was really cool that our team was like, oh, wow, didn't know we had this. And so there's a lot, like you're saying, there's a lot of insurances out there that will help with some of those things.
And what's so interesting too is last year is we brought you in and we started talking about it and we told them, hey, we have this. And just because we were having the conversations, I was pretty taken with how many openly started sharing.
Talking about,
I'm using this.
Yeah.
Right. I was shocked. I was kind of shocked at how transparent people were with it because we had just kind of opened the door.
Yeah. And see, when you open the door, when you have the discussion, when you remove that bias towards it, right? Suddenly you've normalized it.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about this trauma experience here, this is a great role that these business owners and these more senior members of these companies can fill. They can normalize the experience for those who are new to it.
Yeah.
You know, they can normalize the smells. They can normalize the sights. They can normalize the sounds. Hey, it's okay. This is what we see. This is what we do. And just by making it feel like, okay, this isn't out of the ordinary. I haven't experienced this before, but this is apparently normal according to these guys, right? That can help reduce that anxiety. And so the business owners that have been there, done that, the more senior members of your team that have been there, done that, encourage them to take a passive leadership role in that regard of like, hey, let people know that this is normal, right? Let them know what to expect. Let them know what to see. You know, I talked to an officer once who went on a scene of someone who had completed suicide, and he didn't know that that's what had happened, but as soon as he walked in the house, he's like, blood and gunpowder. Like, he knew the smell, right? And interestingly enough, when it comes to trauma, our olfactory senses are the strongest in triggering a response from previous memories. Wow. What we smell will trigger a response more often than not than what we hear, see, or taste, or feel.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a space in the home services industry, in the restoration industry, where people are starting to talk more about it and looking for resources and not normalizing it, but normalizing the conversations around it, right? And so I appreciate you kind of shedding some light on that. I think that's really helpful, and I'm hopeful about what moves forward. It's really interesting for us because a lot of times, like, we're a digital marketing company, right? But we're talking to them about the leads that came in. So we're like, hey, this looked like a great lead. How was it? Well, it was actually a pretty horrific event, right? But that's their job to go in there and take care of that. And we do get feedback from them. Like, it's really hard. It was hard on my team. I'm still thinking about it. I have nightmares about it. Yeah. Like, they're sharing that stuff with us as account managers for their marketing. And so, the thoughts are there. There's room and space and opportunity for owners and businesses to really make a positive impact in lives.
Well, and in the podcast we did just before this, you mentioned that you had the thought last year of what responsibility do I have to my employees, right? And I do think, this is outside looking in perspective, right? But I do think if you're going to be in this industry, you're going to be dealing with these things, you do have that responsibility of making sure that your employees have that resource, that they're connected to it, right? You're not trying to, I'm not saying fix their problems. I'm not saying, don't put them in situations that are going to cause trauma. What I'm saying is making sure that you at least can connect them to somewhere they can go for help. Even if it's, if you're not able to provide the insurance, reach out to those local therapists. They will take cash pay clients. Trust me. Yeah. We'd much rather deal with cash pay than insurance. Right. But they'll work with you. You'll be able to find someone locally who will work with you, but have that safety plan there for them. Right. And for yourself too.
Yeah. I like just calling it a safety plan. Yeah. Like, hey, we have a safety plan in place and this is what it looks like and here are the resources for it. Yeah. Very good. So, okay, we talked about trauma. That was a dark, hard that's a hard part of a conversation to lead out part 2 of this series. So if you didn't listen to part 1, I hope you go back and listen to part 1 because it plays right into this, but more common than that, honestly. And this is worldwide, not industry specific by any means, is just general anxiety. Yep. So I think that's probably what we come across the most. We hear it all the time. Yep. Can you talk to us a little bit about anxiety and how it impacts the person, the productivity, and the business? Yeah.
So from the objective standpoint of diagnosing, right, there's generalized anxiety disorder is probably one of the most common diagnoses that we give out as clinicians. I would imagine, at least in my practice, that's what I see.
I see from my perspective, it's the one people are most comfortable, for lack of a better word,
talking them out. Yeah,
saying,
sure.
I
Yeah.
have anxiety,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
I deal with anxiety. Like that one seems the least, I hear that the most often.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting link between anxiety and trauma too. I mean, I know we're kind of moving past that, but I think it's worth bringing this up for a second because anxiety is the body's physiological response to stress and to the perception that I'm not safe. Right? Now, whether or not you're really not safe, that's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is the perception of it, right? So someone's yelling at me, I almost get in a car accident and I have to slam my brakes on, or, I almost get in a fight at a bar, or whatever it might be, right? It's that perception that I'm not safe. If I don't do what my boss says, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get fired, right? So that stress, that anxiety goes up. Interestingly enough, the connection between anxiety and trauma is when we experience a traumatic event, if it's something that overrides that physiological response system or becomes so intense that we're not able to process it, our nervous system, our emotional system stops at that moment.
Yeah.
And when we have another incident that happens in our life that overlaps that original one, that's the nervous system that responds. Not 45-year-old Ashton responding, but 10-year-old Ashton that was getting yelled at by his dad is what responds. And so trauma affects anxiety tremendously because of that overlap in our emotional response to things. And so as far as how it affects productivity, I mean, that's a conversation that we could have
There's
about
a ton of research
stuff.
on it.
Yeah. I mean, how many times do people avoid completing tasks at work because they're anxious of what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
How often do we sit there and look at our phone and doom scroll because we don't want to face the things that the responsibilities that need done, right? Yeah. And so productivity is tremendously impacted by anxiety. And going back to the last podcast we just did, you're not going to get over that anxiety by avoiding it. One of the biggest things that we use to treat anxiety is exposure therapy. Like, I have a terrible fear of heights. I broke my neck when I was 5 when I got pushed off a slide, right? I can't go up on a ladder. I can't. Even like 1 or 2 steps, it freaks me out. I'm not ready to face that challenge yet in my life.
Yeah.
But the only way that I'm going to get over that fear of heights
Exposure.
is climbing up the rungs of that
Which
ladder.
goes back again, first episode, you got to listen to both parts. You talk about that apple analogy.
Yeah.
Again, that was a great way to visualize it, where it's like you have this anxiety, you're scared of apples, but you want to get to the banana. It's like the only way, you can't just avoid it your whole life.
Right.
Like, there's going to be a point, Ashton, you're going to have to get up on a ladder.
Well, no, I have a teenage son now.
Okay.
Up he goes.
Up he goes. You go hang the Christmas lights.
As soon as that kid moves out of the house, you can call Hayden. Be like, "That's it, Hayden. I'm going up the ladder, man. Come with me."
I'm going down the bread aisle to get to the bananas. I am not going to touch the apples. But it's a great way to describe it. And again, the exposure thing to it, I found, part of my day today is talking with clients. And, there is some anxiety that can come with that when you're like, man, I'm worried this client's going to be upset, or I know they're going to be upset, or this, right? And so the only way to get over that is you just kind of have to do it. You kind of have to jump in and do it. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's even, this is a little deep, but I think there's even room to say, well, why am I worried that they're going to get upset at me?
Yeah.
Right? Be curious. Yeah. We talked about in the last one about being curious. Be curious with yourself.
Yeah.
Wait, what is it that's making me worried about him being upset?
Yeah.
Well, and we talk about it a lot. A lot of times the stories we tell ourselves are way worse than what reality actually is. So it's like, you can worry about it for days and days and days, and then you can make the phone call and be like, that was awesome.
Yeah, nine times out of 10.
Nothing, but you've spent days and days and days worrying about something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just, I don't know if it's human nature. I don't know what that is, but I know that the stories we tell ourselves are pretty powerful and can stop us from doing something. And when we just actually do it, I guarantee you climb up on a ladder, you're probably going to be just fine.
I don't know. I'll let you know in a couple of years.
Yeah, when we figure that out, when Ashton figures that out. I love the vulnerability, Ashton. Like, as someone that is a practitioner of all things mental health, it's fun hearing that you also have your own challenges you got to deal with.
None of us are immune.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
None of us don't face challenges in our life. And I've faced a lot of things, but ladders is not one of them. one of them yet. So
That's awesome.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
That's Ashton's motto. Do
Yeah.
as I say, not as I do. No, that's true. But that's what's hard for you. I think this is important too.
Yep.
Is what's hard for you may not be hard for me.
Right. Yeah.
And vice versa.
Right.
And so I think you've got to, give people enough room
Yep.
and respect
Yep.
to understand that. I hear a lot of times, like, I just don't understand it. Like, what is their problem? Like, they know it's not going to be bad. What is the problem with that? And I know that's not helpful language
Right.
or behavior,
But it's reality.
but it's reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes back to what I was saying about our nervous system, our emotional response, right? When I get on that ladder, it's 5-year-old Ashton that's responding. It's not 45-year-old, right? And so when we have these experiences in our life, these stressors that produce an intense emotional response, if that situation has any overlap with any previous trauma in our life, think about it like a root system, right? It's all going to tap back to whatever the original traumatic event was that sparked that fear in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Really good.
Yeah, it's really complex. Trauma is not an easy thing to conceptualize sometimes.
I hadn't thought about the link to trauma to anxiety, but there is some root there.
Yes, there is.
At all
Yeah.
points.
Well, I mean, yeah, it links to if 70% of people are going to experience some kind of trauma in their life, like it only makes sense that obviously we also talked about the 1 in 5, like 1 in 5 people deal with mental health. It just makes sense that like, trauma is just going to be a leading factor.
Well, and if you think about anxiety and depression, right, in that 1 in 5 statistic, and you start kind of looking at it from like a bigger picture, really a lot of the issues in our life are a matter of expectation and avoidance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that with most of your common mental health
Expectation
issues,
being depression, avoidance being the anxiety
yeah,
piece.
like
okay.
someone with schizophrenia, that's a different type of mental illness. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but you're not going to outthink your schizophrenia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? But when it comes to like depression and anxiety, there is a lot of connection between how we think and how we feel and how we act. And the thing that's so interesting about this is these concepts are old. They are an old part of the human tradition.
Yeah.
Right? The ancient Greek Stoics, Buddhism, ancient Christianity, all of these ancient human beliefs all tap back to that idea that really what I expect and what I worry about, those are the biggest problems, causes of my problems in my life. They're really old truths.
So that whole conversation just triggered in my memory you telling us you had the secret to success. Do you remember what the secret to success you told us was?
Oh yeah, expectations. Manage your
Yes,
expectations.
yes.
Yeah, the difference between when expectation and reality don't line up, that gap fills with anxiety, depression, fear, and anger. And so the more we can keep our expectation in line with reality, the more peace we feel, the less suffering we have in our life.
Yeah.
Right.
Really good.
It's a great way to sum everything up. And I think to kind of close this out, I'd love Ashton to kind of hear, we talked about a bunch of things. I think one of the things that you wanted to make sure we mentioned was the Idaho suicide hotline.
Yeah. If anytime we're talking about suicide, I think it's good to mention those resources.
Yeah.
The 211 line, the care line, Idaho 211, right? You can call that number anytime. If you're calling during normal business hours, they'll connect you to someone who you can talk to. If you call after hours, there's a helpline that it'll connect you through.
And there's resources like that all over the country. There's a national hotline.
And we can we'll put those in the show notes.
Yep, we'll have all of those linked in the description. Other than that, to kind of close this out, I'd love to hear, Ashton, just some resources that people could look into. So obviously, connect with a counselor in your area. We talked about earlier how, if you're a restoration company specifically and are working in any kind of trauma cleanup, it'd probably be good to partner with some kind of counselor on some of those things. Other than that, maybe it's just the anxiety or depression. What are some things people can do if they're starting to recognize that in themselves or in maybe a teammate, a coworker, whatever it is? Yeah. What are some things people can do?
There's a tremendous value in finding purpose, right? And keeping yourself busy, right?
Yeah.
And we hear this all the time. It sounds cliche, but go for a walk. Get some exercise.
Yeah.
Eat healthy. And here I am, do as I say, not as I do, right? but even then, right, there's still a lot of value in just getting out and unplugging for a minute. Set your cell phone down.
Change a pattern, right?
Change a pattern, right? Plenty of self-help books out there. We've talked about a few of them in the last podcast. Another one that comes to mind is actually, it's a really old book. It was written in the 1900s, and I forget the author, but it's called As a Man Thinketh. And it talks all about this idea of just helping your thought, looking at the way you're thinking and how it's affecting your behavior, right? And so reach out for those resources that are going to help you out. Make those connections with people. Look for some kind of stability in your life to just put that emotional chaos, tap it down, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be that way. And the more you recognize that you have that power and control, the better off it is for you.
It's awesome. It's a great way. I think the last thing that I want to do is make sure people know how to get in contact with you. So sure. If there is a business owner out there, restoration business owner, or maybe just an individual that wants to maybe connect with you for some counseling or to help their teammates or their coworkers, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Probably my email address. I don't mind giving it out. It's emotionalflexibility@gmail.com. And that's flexibility with an I, not ability.
Flexibility.
Emotionalflexibility@gmail.com. If anything, I'd be willing to just have a chat with somebody if that's all they need to do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I know when I reached out to you the first time, crazy enough, over a year ago, we were talking about how much can change in a year, right? Yeah. But you answered a lot of questions for me. You helped change my thinking on a lot of things. And I think that this has been really helpful to open up this conversation. Anything top of mind for you that you want to make sure is part of this conversation as we kick off the first couple episodes of mental health awareness?
That's a great question. Don't give up.
Okay.
Don't give up, right? Yeah. I mean, shit happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Life is gonna have a lot of ups and a lot of downs, and we're gonna face things that we don't want to deal with. Just keep taking that step forward. Just keep moving. Don't stop. Just keep moving, right? And there's people around you that care about you. There's places you can go for help, and you can find those. Just keep moving.
Excellent.
It's a lovely way to close us down, Ashton. Seriously, thank you so much for coming back on.
As always, yeah.
A year later, a lot has changed for all of us, but this is going to be, I think, a yearly tradition. We're just going to keep doing this because it's impactful for us, if for nothing else, for me and Katie. But I know there are people listening that get a lot of value out of this. Our team gets value out of this. And yeah, again, I know there's a lot of listeners that are going to love hearing all your recommendations.
It's been great. I've loved it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ashton.
Thanks, guys.
This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.